All right.
We're good.
Are we recording?
We are recording. I am recording here.
We are synced. We clapped. The rig doctor gave me the clap.
The rig doctor gave you the clap. Yep.
All right. Very good.
Yeah. All right, let me flip this a little bit. All right. So, we are here today with my good friend, esteemed colleague, musician, jack of all trades.
I'm jack of very little trades. I'm jack of one trade.
That was actually your first name. It's Jack of Trades, Dani Rabin from Marbin, one of my favorite guitarists of all time, and
human beings.
I mean, I think of you as a guitarist first, and then human being second. I don't know if that's
how I think of myself too.
Yeah. Yeah, your guitar playing defines your humanity.
Yeah, without it, I would be nothing.
Yeah. And today we're going to talk about a bunch of different things, but one of the principal approaches that I really want to talk about is Dani has a really good sense from a technical perspective about the Stevie Ray Vaughan tone and actually the whole right hand approach. And so we're going to talk a little bit about that technique. And then I also really like talking about equipment with Dani because he also has a very unique approach. And we've done some work together, some doctoring with him out in Chicago. And then the thing that I think is also really interesting from a musician perspective is that Dani actually makes a living as a musician. I think a fairly good living comparatively to a lot of his peers and even some of the more established musicians that a lot of us that know and love from the fusion scene, and how he's able to he's designed this business model that actually I think a lot of young musicians could really learn from and that are not employing, and I think even seasoned musicians that are kind of trying to redefine or evolve themselves to kind of the way that the music industry looks. I really am interested in your approach and how you've been able to make this a sustainable way to really make a career path instead of, ending a tour and having no money in your bank account as is consistent with a lot of...
We tried that too.
Yeah, you tried that too. So, it's failing your way to success. But we can talk about this really in any order, and we can also go off script. So I don't know, where do you feel like starting?
Well, first of all, you made my rig, and my rig had problems before, and then I took it to the rig doctor, and he gave me rig Cialis, and I no longer have impedance.
The tone just rockets right off.
Rockets right out of the speaker. Where to start? Well, I think
there's a couple of building blocks here.
Yeah. There's a lot to talk about. I think the first thing you said is really the big disease that guitar players have, and I think everybody has, which is what to expect from your technique versus what to expect from your gear, and how to not conflate it. And I think that's really a confusing kind of world because you're listening to records to check out music. And in a record, it's not really easy to know what in the sonic space comes right from the speaker and what comes post and what comes from the mixing board, what comes from, what is your role as an electric guitarist in terms of tone production? I mean, how far does it go? Is the gain definitely seems to be your responsibility, but is the verb your responsibility? Is the delay your responsibility? Is the compression your responsibility? And how do you, what's the kind of tone that you present to a mixing engineer? And how complete do you want your tone to be heading into a situation? And I think those are real questions that people that just model their aesthetics listening to records can get really lost in. And I think those were not issues in the 60s and 70s. It started happening a little bit later on. Pretty much like the Bradshaw kind of rig era started this imagination, or that became a reality, that you really need to have a complete tone coming from your speaker that's just kind of record ready. And even people like Jeff Beck, when you read about their tone, when they talk about delay and reverb, they said, oh, like the front of the house guy does that. And these days it's unheard of. Like, first of all, you're not traveling with your own sound guy, but it makes total sense if you're in a huge band to have some sort of like amazing like lexicon reverb, or like some eventide unit that costs like thousands and thousands of dollars that's producing the reverb for everybody. I mean, when you listen to like Pat Metheny's group, he's getting all of his verbs through, the sound guy's traveling with. He's just feeding it back to him through his monitors, through this very, very nice studio reverb. But I think the players now really try to get everything on their pedal board and have their sound kind of play ready. And that's something worth thinking about, right? It's like that's kind of like a part of the... If that's the attempt, you're leaving very little room for other people to play with your sound, right? If your sound is already verbed up, there's no way for a sound engineer to dry it up. And for me, going to concerts, especially, listening to a lot of the bands that open for us, I always feel that like everybody's playing too wet for the room. And that also a lot of the choices people are making with the amounts of gain that they're using, and also with the amounts of ambient sound that they're using, is a technical crutch. Like, they don't know how to get the right well, that's on two levels. The gain has to do with the gain or compression has to do with a certain kind of feel that they want from the guitar. And the ambient has to do with how scared they are from their sound. So really what you tend to see in my experience is that there are two kinds of electric guitar players, or really three kinds. Ones that have a very dominant left hand, like Alan Holdsworth, Scott Henderson, John Schofield. And those players tend to play with a wetter kind of sound because there's a certain kind of diffusion and smearing that happens when you're using more delay, more saturation, that kind of carries your playing forward. And then you have players that have a really dominant right hand, like El Di Meola, John McLaughlin, and they tend to have horrible electric guitar tones because they're so dry. They're always there's so little ambience in the sound because they want all the articulation to come from this machine gun right hand. And then you have the players that are kind of in the middle, like Stevie Ray Vaughan, Derek Trucks, that kind of utilize legato and right hand in tandem. And they tend to find, and Jeff Beck too, they tend to find this sweet spot where they can really use a diffused sound, and use gain, but not have it be totally overwhelming. So I kind of put a lot forward there. So I don't know what your thoughts on that are, but that's how I see it.
Yeah, I think you're a much more technical and trained guitar player than I am. So I sort of I heed a lot of your advice. Technically speaking, when talking about some of that stuff, but what I did connect with is this idea of processing guitar tones and the evolution of that, because so much of the 60s, as you mentioned, is sort of the starting point for electric guitar and using at least some degree of effects. So much of that was recorded live. There wasn't a lot of post-production that was occurring there that would allow for, the guitar tone to be morphed without affecting everything else in the room, since everything was recorded in the same area. instead of kind of recording stuff in isolation and maybe having more control. So, if you wanted to add a bunch of delay to the tone, it would affect presumably other instruments in the room or the way that the recording was perceived. So being able to have your hands and your amplifier sort of be the limit to the amount of effect that you could impart onto the sound, that was the limitation, or that was the threshold. When it moved to rack mount systems like what Robert Bradshaw was doing, you move the mix bus into your guitar rig, and you're able to have control over all of these effects, in mixing them in parallel like you would a studio recording. And I do think that it put the power in the hands of the guitarist, which is guitarists we want to be able to control our sound, but I think at the same time, I think it creates an illusion for somebody who is trying to replicate some of those classic tones. And we learned this really acutely when we were doing this one series of videos called Game of Tones, where we were replicating classic guitar tones and playing it back to a blind group of contestants to see whether they could tell the difference between the original recording and the fake. And we were able to do this because we had multi-tracks of some of these classic recordings, Mark Knopfler and Jeff Beck and stuff like that. And the thing that's really difficult is in some of these cases, we know exactly what they use because this was documented and their fans have been able to retell what it is they were using. But even knowing that is not enough necessarily to get the tone because, as you said, your tone is going into the hands of other people. So however the person mic'd that amplifier, what mic they used, if there was a different speaker in that amplifier, if they used a different cabinet with a different speaker, a 212 versus a 112, how many mics and which mics they used, what sort of mic pre's they went into, you can have the exact same rig, and once you start deviating that far from the rig by way of mics, by way of preamps, by way of any sort of post EQ or compression that happens, you can have the exact same rig and have a completely different sound even with the same player.
Sure, and I think that's really that point is why listening to podcasts like this and talk about tone is so deeply dissatisfying a lot of the time, because the answer is always it depends, and the variability is so infinite, because in one way music is comprised of three big elements, right? It's like if you take that big thing which is music and just logically slice it, like in the book we're reading, with your knife of rationality into three big chunks, it breaks up beautifully into harmony, rhythm, and timbre. Those are the three big elements that make up this big pie that we called music. If we want to define music, a good definition is Stravinsky. He called it organized sound, right? So organizing something, putting it in place, is what we call rhythm. It's the question of when and where things happen. And we have very good language to describe that. Amateur language would be like minute 3, second 12. Pro language would be measure 2, 16th note 3. But we can triangulate occurrences in music. That's one subject, and it's very manageable. It's very finite, right? I mean, there's lots of options, but we have good tools to talk about it. Harmony is consistent of the relationship of frequency, and we also have great language for that. Our culture came up with like a system that has equal tuning, 12 notes, we make scales, we make chords, all the combinations. That's really corresponding to what happens in music. So we have the when and the what. But timbre and tone is all the chaos. And that is, how it happens, right? How something happens, whatever, whenever, right? What note, when it happened, but how it sounds to us. That whole thing of overtone structure, of, the words, even the words that you use to describe tone are so elusive because you have to have defining moments with them to understand them. I think a lot of the people, when you say something like bright or dark or honky, and it's like, what the fuck is honky? You know, it's like people just don't understand it's like it's a word, sure, but like how does that relate to like a guitar sound? And like a lot of time actually in the studio I found out that like the way I'm using words is not necessarily how the mixing guy understands them. You know, like sure, bright and dark people understand it. It has to do with like EQing the top and the bottom.
Sure.
But when you go into like the more subtle language of describing sound, I mean, like what you're describing when you're trying to get like the Knopfler sound, and good tone in general, like what does that even mean? Like a thing that I always notice is that good tone can't live outside of good playing. You can't have good playing, like good tone and bad playing. It's like nobody recognizes it. It's like, oh my god, that terrible player sounded awesome. You know, it's just it's like it would never happen. You know,
Right.
so if it can't live in bad playing, you know, then it's like in one way, it's like what are we talking about? And whenever you find these good tones that just kind of like do this, what they really mean, and I've noticed this with people, is that there is some sort of pleasing, usually rhythm that happens from one note. Like a delay could be a good tone if it's like doing some rhythmic thing like it's like, oh, that's a good tone, right? Or a reverb that decays beautifully, like whoosh. But what you're really hearing then, you're not hearing like you would never hear like in a short E note with like gain be like pow and be like, oh my god, that tone. You know, it always has
Right.
to do with what the tone allows. You know what I mean? Because Billie Holiday doesn't have a beautiful voice if she just sings an E, right? It's not in like people always say like, you know, I know who that guy is in one note, but that's a metaphor. It's kind of like an exaggeration. They don't.
Sure.
They know who that guy is in
Yes.
3 or 4 notes.
Right.
Because there's a lot of interplay. There's a lot of subtle things when you do this, and different tones inspire and allow you to play in different ways. And I think that's really, I mean, and also, I mean, you're the guy that designed all the Vertex stuff. I'm the guy who uses basically exclusive Vertex stuff. I'm pretty sure you didn't intend for you know, when you listen to it for it to be like used like shredding Fusion. You know, I mean that wasn't probably in the forward of your imagination for the pedal. You were just trying to make a really good pedal.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that what you just said is I think it's a perspective that I haven't heard, although I am in complete agreement. It was sort of one of those things where these are ideas that are disaggregated in my mind, and then you just, you know, made the Jello mixture
Yeah.
to make them all congeal. But I think that it is absolutely true, and I think that these sort of analogies of, you know, a great singer playing one note, or sort of using hyperbole to, you know, talk about you know, being able to hear somebody in one note and know who they are. It's true. It's almost like it's the connective tissue between notes that really sort of tells you who they are. You know, how long they wait to transition to another note, and how the vibrato sounds. You know, because just doing vibrato on a E string is, you know, not enough to know, you know, who it is that they are, you know, obviously, because I think that the harmony thing is also really important, even if it's simplistic.
Sure,
Even if it's Stevie Ray Vaughan, you know, and it's a pretty fixed group of notes that are being used.
Yeah.
It's how he gets from those notes, and the intensity and you know, the timbre of those notes. It really, I think it's absolutely a very complete framework, actually.
Yeah,
I think,
and the
to
zen
identify this.
the zen reality of music is something that you easily can disregard. But this is the thing: when you're listening to Stevie Ray Vaughan, it's happening, right? It's like that. When you think about his tone, you're thinking about something in your memory. When you're listening to Stevie Ray Vaughan, even for a moment, and you think you're focusing on tone, you're never hearing tone alone. Tone can't happen without rhythm, because rhythm is the moment when tone happens. And those things only break apart in our imagination. Like this thing of working on your tone separate. Yeah, but to make this thing, you hit the guitar and you hit it a certain way, and you chose a certain note in a certain area of the guitar that's creating a certain behavior from the amp. Your high notes don't sound like your low notes, and it's and this is the thing about I think what at least people who come from my world, who are not your fellow designer of pedals but your consumer of pedals, I would assume, or at least a portion of them are, the questions for them a lot of time is what makes my playing, what pedal fits my playing. But I think the question should be, how do I get my playing to where any pedal is workable? Because good technique has to do with getting the sound out and treating the guitar like an acoustic instrument. Now, I grew up playing a pod, I that was my first gear. I had the red thing that looked like a kidney bean. Yeah, exactly. I like the kidney bean thing into computer speakers. That was my first rig. And I had this sound that was like all the gain maxed out with an insane amount of reverb and delay. And I would imagine that I'm Sean Lane, just like just shredding, right? And through a Van Halen guitar with humbuckers, like high output thing. And that was like me at 15. And the first time I had a real amp, I really had, I plugged in. I was like, what the, it's like just nothing came out. Nothing. It was horrible. And it was horrible for years. And I thought that this technique was how I played guitar, which is like, but it's like if you put it on an acoustic guitar, it just sounds like a mouse running on the floor. It's not making any sound. There's not enough pressure. There's not attack. There's nothing. It was kind of legato playing that was just the left hand was marking it, and if there was enough compression, enough gain, and then enough diffusion and verb and delay to kind of disguise it, something would come out, and I'd kind of make the notes. And I think people who are trapped in this tactile world that people like Axe-Fx, Fractal, Camplers produce, and then start getting into tube amps and into analog gear and are looking for a similar response, are always going to create a situation where they eliminate all the dynamic range that an electric guitar has, because you have to just crank the compression, you have to have a gate, you have to have too much delay and too much reverb to hear the separation between notes. So you're smearing it to accommodate the way you learn to touch the instrument instead of relearning how to touch the instrument. And when Stevie Ray Vaughan is the gold standard, a guy who's a monster at picking, listen to him play a 12-string guitar on the MTV thing. He gets the same sound. I don't care what anybody says. On a 12-string, it's the same. It's the same licks, and he's just bending and getting that metallic clank out of everything. And you were asking about the technique. And, it's very similar to gypsy jazz in the sense that most guitar players have this motion with their wrist that's kind of side to side, this thing. I don't even know what to call it. But when you look at people, and for bluegrass and stuff like that, it makes sense, flat picking, all that stuff. But when you're playing, older styles of music, the way people played oud and the way people play gypsy jazz, there's a technique called the rest stroke technique. And the whole idea is that you're rotating this bone with a very loose wrist that acts like a paperweight to create momentum. And what you're doing is you're cutting through the string and resting on the next. And when you look at Stevie Ray Vaughan, it's definitely when he's playing chords, this is definitely the motion. Hendrix too. But even when he's playing single notes, a lot of times that super, playing 11s to 13s to where the string, the reason to do it isn't the sound you get from the string, it's that the string isn't a noodle, it's the resistance. You know, because if you hit a 9 like that, basically the vibration pattern is so wide that it's not really popping back into center fast enough for you to hit it again. It's kind of slippery. It goes away, right? And you're maxing out on it, on the vibration, on just the range. The string is basically clipping. It's a maximum oscillation. But when you're doing this with, like, you know, tiny, like, it's also like the 13th is a myth. Like, you know, it was kind of like a hybrid set, 13 set on the outside, 11s in the middle, and E flat. But regardless, when you're playing this way, you get this metallic kind of response, very slappy, that's much more the sound than any sort of setup. I mean, I've seen people who, like, spent insane amounts of money to imitate the rig of Stevie, and then, you know, you see their technique, and it's cute. They're like old grandpa touching the, like, I'm playing like Stevie. It's like, you know, it's just, it's like, just look at him. He's murdering the stuff. Like, you're touching it like a baby. You know what I mean? And there's so manhandling the guitar and understanding the motion mechanics is a very, very integral part of getting whatever sound you're in, and just that's just observing the physicality of the players that you're looking at,
right?
You know. But yeah, I mean, on that note, I will say that gear does play a part. You know, but it plays a part. I mean, it's kind of like when you go to the store to buy a TV, and somebody, like, shows you like a 4K top of the line thing, and then the thing you thought was awesome 10 years ago, like the big screen, like, you know, whatever resolution that is, and then they show you, like, you know, a few receivers, and like, oh, it's that kind of thing. But guitar players don't understand. It's like, you're making the movie. You are not in charge of sharpening the image. That's some guy in Tokyo working in, you know. So it's like, it doesn't. Pulp Fiction is Pulp Fiction on the phone and in the movie theater. If you're working on Pulp Fiction, you know what I mean, making a great movie, you shouldn't be obsessed with the details of, you know, how sharp the image is. You know?
Yeah. So, like, I have two questions.
Mm-hmm.
First is, do you have the ability in your setup right now to show us, technique-wise, what that actually looks like in practice? Second question is, gear-wise, if you were sort of to distill the Stevie Ray Vaughan thing in equipment, would you say that it's as simple as Tube Screamer and Fender amp, or do you think that there's multiple ways to skin that cat?
I mean, if you look at Stevie Ray Vaughan himself, he's used very different gear through the years, and it all sounded just like Stevie. So, I mean, I would say, if you really think that there is one era of Stevie that you like, and you can understand through the lens of the same player how the different setups sound, and there's a strong preference, you know, then sure. But also understand that you're talking about very minute details. Yeah, it's kind of like saying that, you know, you like the way Arnold Schwarzenegger's body looks through camera A versus camera B, and then you just replace your body with Arnold Schwarzenegger's body, and like, oh, camera B is awesome, you know? It's like, that's not what you like. It's not the point. It's the fact. The fact is that he is amazing. And to study his amazingness is something that I think is absolutely worthwhile. Absolutely. But, and tone and gear is definitely a part of it that you're going to have to contend with. But I would say you're not going to get that sound out of an X Effects. I don't think he would. You know, I think he would, if you put him in a room with maybe a pod, an X Effects, and a Fractal, he would come out very frustrated, because things wouldn't give him the things he's looking to get physically. You know, it's like I play a lot of gypsy jazz. When I play a dreadnought, I always feel that it's like it's not giving me that thing. I don't like this piece of equipment. You know, you gave me, you gave me a screwdriver where I needed a hammer. It's just the wrong tool for the job. So I would say, yeah, I mean, Fender amps and tube screamers work. Probably Marshalls and tube screamers are going to work too. You know, something about the way tube amps that have a lot of headroom, you know, and distortion pedals and overdrive pedals, you know, and again, some things are easier. Definitely, like shoot out the frequency range you want, have that kind of tightness in the lows and the mid range that's necessary. Don't sag too much. You know, there's a lot of you need a sound that is ambient and that is, you know, kind of wet enough in one way, because when you listen to like Stevie's ISO tracks, it's like reverb, like insane amounts of reverb, but it's not the kind of reverb that people are. It's not like hall reverb that's just feels ridiculous.
It's from his amp.
Yeah,
it's all from his amp.
Yeah, so it's like, you know, it's an insane amount of spring reverb. So it has, you know, but again, if you're going for a Jeff Beck kind of, you know, that ethereal sound, you can dial in spring reverbs all day. It's never going to sound like that. You know, you need like that really fancy digital thing that makes you feel like you're in some sort of Taj Mahal structure.
Right.
You know, so it's understanding, I think, what it is that you're going for. In terms of technically, let me just get that one sec. Yeah. So,
is this going through your Pro Tools?
No.
Yeah.
No. It's just I'm gonna do very little of it because my neighbor's gonna kill me. It's just, this is actually Alan Holdsworth's H&K amps. He left it here before he died and never took them back. But so I mean, again, it's like, you know, it's the pinchy stuff. But what I'm talking about specifically is just getting those. See that motion? Just getting through the string like that. It has a certain brightness that when you're playing differently, you're just not gonna get. It's a different kind of way of touching that produces a really different kind of result.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, you know, I have to imagine with his right hand technique that his hands are just always chewed up, you know, because his attack on the right hand was so aggressive.
But this is the thing to understand. This motion is much looser because you're using gravity. Here, you're always using your musculature, right? You're always moving with this tiny muscle. This rotation of the hand, it's actually much easier to play because you're just, it's like, try this. Just take your hand, okay, up, and but you're pressing down. Just take it up and then let go of that part, right? So you have this lady hand. Now, you're closing your fist. You shouldn't close your fist. You should just let everything loose except for the pressure it takes here. In the motion, imagine you're putting out a match. So right now you're kind of going like this, but imagine you just the way you would normally put out a match. That's identical, right? Yeah. And you when you actually put out, and it's not this is not hyperbole. This is actually the technique, right? So when you're actually putting out that match, just to make the fire go out, you automatically do it right. And if you can train yourself to just move that here, you got all those, you know, the funk playing that, like, I don't understand how the world got obsessed with like funk guitar right now. It's like literally the easiest shit on guitar like ever created, but like everybody's like, it's like online how to play funk guitar. It's like, what? It's like just like 16th notes, yeah. But yeah, I mean, like all that. It's just that putting out the match and keeping that kind of pattern. And you could, but you know, a lot of stuff people aren't doing is like using other stuff. So, you know, and Stevie has a lot of that. Right. Or like. So that kind of thing, it's very easy, very loose kind of technique, you know, but also when he's playing like that. Dun, go, go, go. That's how he gets that explosive kind of like splattery, you know, just being able to do that.
Yeah.
Cool.
I think that this is I mean, you know, there's people from all walks of life that are you know, watching this or listening to this, but I think that as far as I've seen, I think that was actually, from a technical perspective, probably the most efficient way to synthesize that approach. So you've broken it to the world.
Oh, I appreciate it. The other element in his specific playing that you need to get together, if you want to do just one exercise that's gonna get you there, is being able to control the sound with your left hand. You see, like the problem with the rest stroke technique, and the reason it's exclusively a technique of gypsy jazz. Imagine, you know, the middle pedal. You know how you have two pedals on a piano, right? The mute and the sustain pedal. Think about what they're doing. It's a piece of felt, and in the neutral position, if these are the strings, it's just far enough away to where when they're in maximum vibration, it's touching the felt. But it's kind of relaxing everything, not letting it, you know, kind of create that reverb, which is, it's not reverb, right? It's just harmonically sympathetic things happening. The same way if you play a high E string, it's making the low E string, you know, reverberate sympathetically. So so everything that has overtones in common in the piano kind of blooms when you press the sustain pedal, right?
Right.
So when you're playing gypsy jazz guitar, that's a positive thing. I mean, I'll show you one second. So if I'm playing a guitar like this, the way I'm playing lines is actually going to, I'm not going to mute with either my left or my right hand, but it's going to create that same piano style reverb. Hear that? It's like this soup of sound that's wonderful, but it has no muting technique. So this hand off the guitar kind of approach is like pressing that that sustain pedal on the piano. Now the way most people play guitar, right around here in the position to palm mute, but not really palm muting, is kind of like no pedal on the piano. The felt is kind of far away, but still sometimes you touch things, kind of kill them, relax maybe the bottom strings when you play the high strings to where you don't realize you're doing it, but that's what you're doing. The shred thing, right? This palm muted thing is pressing that middle pedal of the piano. The felt is on the strings, right? You have a muting technique with your right hand that's just controlling all the gain, and then if it's a lot of gain, you know you have to also work your volume knob. Like Malmsteen between phrases will close the it's really integrated into your playing just to control, you know, the bloom of the notes. Now, as you start introducing gain into your sound, the more the notes will bloom. Like you can't play a phrase like that, because the low strings are going to start blossoming. So you're going to have to either do this or do what Stevie does, which is the left hand muting. Right? So the left hand muting has you have to learn how to get one note on the guitar without, while hitting multiple strings. And the easy way to do it is just like take your index finger, learn how to get a note on every string while hitting all the other ones. Second finger, third finger, fourth finger. Those are all the options for fingers and the rest of the position. Takes a while though to get it. But that way you can play phrases while hitting multiple things in a free way and getting only the notes you need. That concludes the guitar lesson part of the program.
Well, I actually, I want anybody, especially if you're watching this, I wish that when I was 10-year-old Mason, obsessed with Stevie Ray Vaughan and Texas Flood, that somebody could have put it to me that simply.
Yeah.
Because so often it becomes convoluted, but I think also, I think it presumes that your guitar teacher understands that technique, which is probably not a lot of them. They're so disaggregated in, at that time they had kids coming to them that wanted to, learn Joe Satriani or wanted to learn pop music of the generation, that doubling down on just Stevie Ray maybe wasn't an economically viable decision for them. But
I wouldn't put it on the guitar. I put it on the guitar students, not the guitar teachers. The guitar teachers are also guitar students. And we're all like, at the end of the day, you need to figure out how to do the things you want to do. And I know, for me, like as a person, something that's easy for me is putting things to words, but it's only after I understand them. And it's like, understanding them has to do with, I think, a really healthy assumption with anything you do in life, but music in particular, gear, all that, is don't assume that some genius came up with some genius thing and that's what enables him to do what he does. Assume that it's a person just like you who's making decisions, not entirely sure that they're gonna work, just trying things.
Right.
And I don't know, like you've seen how much I know about gear and rigs. I've made records that people think the tone is great. Just by trying things, and some things about the tone wasn't great. And some of them, I've had cables that were loosely connected, probably creating a noise floor that's pretty crazy, and probably a lot of things could have been much better, even with my sound going to the microphone. But at the end of the day, it was good enough for what I was doing.
Yeah, and I think that big picture oriented, anything that I'm talking about in any of the video content that we're putting out through YouTube or any of the stuff that we're doing here, it's sort of like very last 5% sort of stuff. Mm-hmm. Like certainly people who have great technique that are using good gear and are using solderless cables, it's not like their tone is over. You know what I mean? Like you could still get a good sound, and I think that people in a blind comparison would still say this guy still has great tone, solderless or not, you know. But the thing that I'm doing, or the content that I'm producing, is sort of how to bridge the gap of like that final 5%.
I could totally notice it too. Like in the rig you made me, I had a solderless rig, and plugging into the rig that you made me, it was just like, holy hell! There are areas of tone that I couldn't get, but that I could get plugging straight into my amp. And now this is the thing, when I make records, I actually don't use any ambient effects ever. I let our mixing guy do that, reverb and delay. And it's not fun to track without your reverb and delay, It's for a lot of people, it's really terrifying. For me, it's not pleasant, but I can do it. I'm used to it. But since in Marbin we have saxophone, I have to balance the guitar sound with the saxophone. I can't really make a lot of decisions before I know you know, mixing decisions while tracking.
Yeah.
So, I get this experience of just plugging basically through a distortion pedal into the front of the amp when I'm making an album, and my rig now sounds a lot like that, and
Yeah.
I love that. But
Yeah.
you gotta love it. That's the other. I think a lot of people read online that they need to love the sound of plugging straight into an amp, and that's what their rig should sound like. But then when they correct all the loss in tone and actually get that kind of feel, if they succeed to follow your instruction, they get a rig they hate because they're absolutely butt naked plugged to the front of the amp, which can be terrifying if you don't have the control. You know?
Right. Yeah, I mean, it is a different thing. In one of the podcasts that I did with Steen Skridstrup, who's like kind of the Danish, sort of like rig builder, sound designer extraordinaire. He said something interesting, which is sort of just like a way to phrase something that I hadn't sort of, again, using my Jello analogy, I knew all this stuff, but it hadn't congealed in that particular way for me, was he talks about defining your reference point. And so maybe for you as a guitar player, imaginary guitar player X, the reference point for what he's considering his bass line is actually not guitar into amp. Maybe it is that plus a certain EQ or a certain color or an added compression or whatever, and that's what he's calling neutral, or that's what he's calling baseline. And I think that a lot of guitar players have not established their baseline, or they're calling their guitar plug directly into amp their baseline, but they actually haven't experimented really playing with that tone to know that either they don't like it, or that it's too revealing, or that it's too unforgiving, but they want what they believe to be that sound without really using that reference point as a checkpoint for themselves.
Sure, I mean,
or balance.
At what point do you stop trying to get a more accurate mirror and go to a gym?
Right.
That's all I'm trying to say.
Yeah.
At what point do you have this revelation that it's like, oh, it's just me. It's me through a dirty mirror. It's me through a less dirty mirror. Oh my God, the mirror is spotless. I am disgusting. I am hideous. I need to get my ass on a treadmill. It's like,
oh
it's
my
like
gosh.
that is.
I need to use this analogy. And so,
that's all that's happening, though. It's so clearly that. What is tone? What is this thing? You're getting the reality from the speaker. It's like, and what kind of reality? Well, the reality of your playing. What you're putting into the guitar. Again, through filters, right? It's like, this distortion just makes people crazy.
It's real. I think it's another gem that I will in all likelihood use.
That you'll cherish.
I will. We've pulled out a few in this one.
Yeah.
I think the next thing that we haven't covered yet, because I think we've covered most of what we set out to do today, it is really about the business end of being a musician. And one thing in working with a lot of I guess you and I both have really, I have on the gear creation or the rig creation side worked with a lot of these guys, and you've toured with a lot of these guys or opened for a lot of these guys or been on cruises, fusion cruises or things like that with a lot of these guys. There is a misnomer that a lot of these iconic guitar players that a lot of us know as household names are really still killing it. And that they're making these great livings the same way that they were in 1980 or 1990.
Yeah, that's not true.
and a lot of them are really struggling, and a lot of them have been really humbled by the changes that have been made in the economy, or maybe not humbled mentally, but maybe humbled economically. And one thing that I thought was really interesting in kind of getting to know you in understanding Marbin, not that you're Scrooge McDuck and you're swimming in your vault of gold, but you're making a living as a musician
Yeah.
that doesn't like you're a musician and you own a house.
Right.
You own the place that you live. Like most musicians that are in their early 30s, like this is an impossibility for them unless they've have either inherited wealth or generational wealth, or they've married somebody who has a job that allows them to do that. And I'm really curious about, like, what does this model look like that's allowed Marbin to really be prosperous and succeed, and how is this technique different than maybe what a lot of our guitar heroes and icons are trying to do and kind of not working in this era of being a musician, creating music and touring?
Yeah.
To the degree you're willing to share.
Sure. Okay, well, it's a complicated, it's a long kind of tangent. I will say that the big thing that you see with the more known guitar players is that they are now getting to lie in the bed that their managers made for them. And there was a gold rush in the music world that just is over. And this was really from the cassette, like vinyl to cassette to CD era, where everybody was replenishing their catalogs and everybody, CD, Tower Records, all that stuff, up till Napster and streaming. There were a few waves of capitalizing on recorded music that a lot of these people, I mean, a guy like Scott Henderson, was positioned perfectly in time in the late 80s, early 90s for guitar. Just, there was Alan Holdsworth too, Van Halen, all the Shrapnel guys. It was a real golden era of guitar playing where there was just a lot of money, a lot of opportunity, and managers were able to sell to musicians. The world was like that too. You needed managers, but they would also really sell this idea that your time is valuable and you should do art with your time and let me handle the business. And everybody jumped on board. And I think that's a very hard habit to kick. The idea that you are in charge of your own career is devastatingly difficult or impossible for a lot of artists, myself included partially. Dani, the saxophone player in our band, does all the booking. And I would never do that. I would never in a million. If he didn't do it, we would have to get somebody. Because I tried doing it, and it's not for me, right? It's like I can't spend every day doing that for a few hours, and he can. So props to him. It's amazing that he can. And, and a lot of the bands that we know that have managers, like one time we tried to get a booking, no, I'm talking about a booking agent. We tried to get a booking agent, and they sent us this itinerary that Mondays were just in this color. And it's like, oh yeah, there's no shows on Mondays. And we're like, well, we've played a show every Monday on tour for the last 5 years. What do you mean there's no shows on Monday? When we tour, we play 7 nights a week because Dani books 7 nights a week. So we get to play every day. So in any case, that's something that's just, our situation, I guess, is different because we grew up in a world where all that stuff was already over. And there was another golden age of musicians that people don't talk about, was really the late 2000, zeros to 2010s, which is this little tiny space and time of iTunes. And this is something people don't talk about, but I was talking to Jonathan Kreisberg, New York guitar player, and he was saying that he was making hand over fist money when he started his own label and was selling his own CDs on iTunes. So this bridge between CD sales and streaming, where you could sell downloads. You know, people that were really on top of it before streaming showed up on the scene made a lot of money selling albums, starting labels, selling other people's music. Apple would take, 30-40%, something crazy, but they would still make 60% of the money of recorded music. That's all over now. So the question for us was how to structure our lives in a way that would allow us to survive it. And for the first 6 years, we were touring 250, 300 nights a year and barely surviving. That was really skin of our teeth. But we would always try to make the best decisions we could with the resources we had, which were super limited. And at an early stage of trying to be on the road, it's much more about cutting expenses than increasing your income, because there's just nobody knows you, and for us, really nobody knew us. We're not from the States; we're from Israel, so we couldn't even rely on friends to show up to gigs, and we just would tour everywhere. And we built it slowly and kept making albums and selling merch at shows and doing this. And eventually, I found my niche in this world of what to do for the business, which was really more on the marketing side of it and being interactive with our audience. And this happened, with Facebook Live. I was really on top of it since the day it started. I'm giving you kind of a disjunct history of the band, but it was touring. Really, what happened with us was just touring for years. Unlike our heroes and like Scott Henderson, Alan Holdsworth, we hung out with these people, and they would always call Alabama or Tennessee or flyover states. They would always use this term, and we never believed that was true, because we started touring the whole states and we just didn't notice a difference between New York and Alabama. Sure, there's nicer things in New York, like I like going for like fancy sushi, but like, even that now is everywhere. But back 10 years ago, the coffee was better. Some art things were present that aren't present in small town America. But our shows, the people that showed up, there were fusion people here and there were fusion people there. There was no such thing anymore. I think phones and everybody kind of being fed the same information online, YouTube, all that stuff created this uniformity in culture that's just, at least in the States, was pretty equally dispersed. So we didn't find that there was these huge disparities in people getting our music in small town America or in the coastal areas. And it was just not a part of our experience, and we were just honest with it. We're like, okay, so we're just going to play everywhere. It doesn't matter how small or big the town is. And we'd play like bars where there's no stage on the floor, no PA. We'd bring our own powered speaker, have the saxophone through that, and just did that for years. And the idea was that we're fighting for real estate in people's consciousness. Every person that's buying anything from us is, or consuming our music at some capacity as a fan, right? And we're just building it one by one. And I it's kind of like, imagine that you're a shampoo salesman and you make shampoo in your bathtub. And it's great shampoo. You just love it. You love the way your hair feels. There's nothing on the market that's quite like it. But nobody knows you. And you have like Jewel Osco and like all these giants like Whole Foods selling their own brands. And they don't want anything to do with your shampoo. So what we did is we knocked on doors, held people down, washed their heads, and then they're like, oh, it's nice, I like it. I'll tell my friends. And we just repeated the process indefinitely. And then we made a video, high-quality video in 2015 or 15, that went very viral. It was kind of like a shampoo commercial on daytime television.
Like herbal essence.
Yeah. And people shared it, and that gave us the starting push online to where our Facebook page started growing. And then I went through this whole gypsy jazz journey, learning how to really play the style that was all like the Truman Show on Facebook Live, just every day, and talking to the people and just being really like no script, myself, hanging out. Gave people a window into a part of my life, which I think they appreciated, and kept touring. And then just bigger opportunities came our way, festivals, those rock cruises. Um, but it's more of the same. I mean, for us, we play the shows. Now it's just a place where we're selling, or was for people who are not aware, there's this virus going around now,
Right.
that ended the world. But the way the world was, we would we tour, we'd sell a lot of tickets, we'd sell albums at shows, we sell them online, and yeah, I mean, there's good money in music. I think the big thing to understand right now is that people in pop and people 20 years ago worked with very big pies that got split in a lot of ways. Reality right now makes much smaller pies, many more of them. There's much more music now than there was 20 years ago, but all the pies are smaller. But it's your choice how you're going to slice them, depending on how hard you're willing to work. But some jobs were also eliminated by technology. Like, think about it like this: a driver 30 years ago needed to know the roads, needed to know how to read a map, right? It wasn't a mindless job of following your phone. A road manager needed to get on the phone with hotels before they shut, because they would shut back in the day, and book rooms and calculate things on the map, and figure out where to eat. There was no Google, it's like you needed to know things, and you needed to have resources and ways of knowing them, and it was a lot of energy. Right now you can be your own booking agent, your own manager, your own road manager, your own driver, and it's no problem, right? So you get to keep those pieces of the pie. That's 4 jobs, so the more of the less directions you can slice your pie, the question is, like, how can you make the slice you get at the end of the day equal or greater to a guy generating 10 times the capital that just has a huge team working for them?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And what do you think, is the difficulty of some of maybe the legacy guitar players that a lot of us know and love? Is it they're unwilling to do those jobs, or they, as you said, they're now lying in the bed that their managers made for them, and that maybe their managers don't exist in the same way that they did, and they're not insulated the way that they were 10 or 20 years ago, that now they're stuck, or they're not able to develop those skills, or they're unwilling to develop those skills on their own.
Hustling is a skill, right? It's like,
right.
If you've never hustled, if you had somebody hired for you that did your hustling, and now it's all your job. I mean, realistically, you're not going to pick it up at 65. You're not going to start getting on the phone and sending emails just in random and also, I mean, a lot, if you have a very, it's an ego trap, that's really what it is. It's like,
absolutely.
It's not, it's
Absolutely.
Feeling like I should have this and this and this happen. I'm not going to do this work. It's beneath me, right? It's like, dude, I don't care. I'll do anything. It's like, I'll play. I'm
Right.
Well, it's not true. I'm not gonna do stupid covers of pop songs in a jazz way. There's a lot of, like, I'm a monkey. I'm just not that kind of monkey. You know what I mean? It's like there's a lot of like whorish moves that I'm capable of, but there's a whole slew of them that I would never do, right? Because I would be so embarrassed to.
Right.
But not in the same way. I mean, I think yeah, a lot of these people they're in a situation where they had people take care of them, and those people no longer have careers in this business.
Right.
There was just
Right.
so much money in selling music 25, 30 years ago. Just unimaginable amounts. So you had all this industry and jobs around it, even niche styles.
Yeah.
Yeah, but now you just have to be self-sufficient and just creating a
Right.
new dynamic.
Yeah, and I can understand it's really hard to do that in a way that feels dignified to somebody that has relied on this particular model
Yeah.
for a long time. So
I,
I think the
I
last thing.
have to say something that's gonna get bleeped out, if I may.
Okay.
It's if you suck the devil's cock, you're gonna have to swallow a lot of fiery cum.
Is that straight from the mind of Dani Rabin?
Pretty much.
Yeah. Well, I think the last question, if I may, that I'd like to finish up on is, what advice would you give to either somebody who's finishing their last semester at Musicians Institute or Berklee College of Music, and they're about to embark on what you did? What would you say that your initial advice would be to them, and equally for if a legacy guitar player is listening to this, and there are a few that are, and I don't presume to know all of their positions, but what advice would you give them if it is somebody that's 65 and whatever they're doing is not working, they need to reinvent themselves? What would be your advice to those two different people in those two situations?
Well, I mean, the 65. Let's start with the second part. I'm in no position to give the 65-year-olds. I have a lot of respect for all the people who have made great music and built this kind of thing. It's the ground that we're all standing on. The reason that we have an audience and an industry. John McLaughlin's and the Miola, the Scott Hendersons of the world paved the way.
Yeah.
Regardless of how cushy the world used to be in one way, they still had to do a lot of work, and they did all the artistic work. I have no criticism, and actually I have no advice, because I can't imagine. I don't think that they, at this point, they have we just developed differently. We developed in a world that we're like the lizards in the desert that just can survive without water. Like, I bit a cactus last week, I'm good. Just that's like that was like our vibe. But they grew up with money. They have bills. They have mortgages. They're gonna have to do what they're gonna have to do. Institutions like schools, grants, panhandling on the internet, like the GoFundMe's, like all this stuff. They will have to do what they have to do, and the struggle is real. But I'm not worried about them, and also they already earned a lot of money, so some of these people just had festivals that paid I know some numbers of some people. It's like they make good money. It's just relative to the life situation they got to. Maybe they can't support their lifestyle. Maybe they have to reduce their lifestyle. Maybe they have to move to a different place. And some people are flat broke. Money is hard. But for the young musicians, who are the people who really are, maybe need advice and should have some, I would say that to put all of your eggs in one basket, and I sent you that book, Zen and the Motorcycle Maintenance.
Yep.
Are you making good headway?
I'm halfway through right now.
Okay, so in the beginning, you remember where he talks about ghosts? There's a part where he's talking about what ghosts are. His kid says that he had like a Native American friend who believed in ghosts, and then he's trying to explain what ghosts are. And in music, or in life really, a ghost is, or let's start with mythology. In mythology, a ghost is what you get when you don't bury something properly, when you give something the improper burial. And your dreams can very easily become the ghost of your dreams. if you don't bury them properly. And you bury something properly by trying and failing. And if you really try to do what it is that you set out to do, which is making records, being a great player, having a career, being a great player, having your friends think you're a great player, having 10,000 people think you're a great player, having the world think you're a great player. I don't know what it is. Could be anything, you know. It could be juggling, you know. Whatever you want to do, just do it for real. Put all the energy it takes. Do your best. See if it's for you, because you can't go off an imaginary model of the world and then gauge whether it was successful or not, because that's just a figment of your imagination. You don't know what the world is like, and it keeps changing too. And when you get on the road, you're constantly surprised by everything, by people's reaction, non-reaction, indifference to your music, by how you sound with people, by how you just learn things, because the world is vast and complex, and if you don't get to meet it with what you're trying to do, then you never gave it a chance. And if you give it a chance, then you stand a chance of if it fails, of burying your dreams properly, knowing you tried. And if you succeed, you get to live whatever you intended to do, and really climb this evolution of your dream wherever it leads. You know, some people go off to be sidemen, some people end up producers, some people change direction, some people become, you know, professional players. And so I would say try at 100%. You don't, if you're 21 and you're worried about your 401k, you're too much of a pussy to be a guitar player.
I mean, it's. I think this is pretty much analogous to. I mean, anybody really in life. You know, it's. You've distilled it in a musical context here, but. And you know, in seriousness, I mean, it's very poignant what you just said, and I think very true. And as two people, in my view, between you and I, that you know, that took that risk and are doing the thing that we love, it really is an incredible it is an incredible journey. And you know, there's been points in my career where I thought I was gonna have to bury the dream. You know?
Oh man, me too.
And so it actually is a really, I think, apt analogy to speak in those terms. And I think that hopefully anybody listening to this that's on the precipice of what's next, especially, I can't imagine trying to graduate from college right now in this time. You know, trying to figure out what's next,
intense.
Because
specifically in this time, I can't even imagine.
Yeah, but I do have hope for you know, you and a lot of people, because you have adapted to a lot of different things. You know, like you were able to figure out how to transcend.
We'll see. I mean, I think right now we're in an interesting time, and I'm optimistic about it, because you see the world getting split into two directions, right? And two facets for music and art and everything. And one of them is shorter and shorter attention, like Instagram 1 minute video kind of thing, with a very specific edited thing where people totally accept the fabricated. You know, it's kind of like. And it's shrinking. It's gonna. I feel like a minute is going to become. Eventually, it'll be like 2 seconds. It's a great lick. And then you have this absolute long form, like what we're doing now. You know, Joe Rogan, and a return to the organic, a return to people really playing, and there's something about almost like authenticity is making a comeback, because the edited and the accurate and mechanically precise is kind of like, we have too many tools. It used to be a challenge. It used to be musical collage making, the tools were so crude that it was hard to do. And like to make a Sinatra record, to make a Beatles record, the multi-tracking, integrating all these machines and creating these textures, it was a chaotic process that when you could master it would yield these results that were just new. But now, like everybody, like you just see like these things where it looks like a band playing, it just looks like a Zoom meeting. You know what I mean? Like you see them on Facebook, like is it trying to like make it cool? And for me, I just watch it. I'm just like, this is horrible. It's just I feel horrible. Listen, it's not like it's kind of like I don't know what it feels like finishing a bag of popcorn. It's like, you know what I mean?
And you got all the hard kernels at the bottom.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's just like you did it, and it's salty, and you feel kind of gross, and you're never gonna remember this meal or this moment, and all it did was kind of like it was crunchy, but you regret it.
Yeah.
And it's like it's just bad, you know? It's bad and it's easy, and like it's just this return to substantive. I feel it. Like, I feel it personally. I listen to Sinatra. I listen to Nat King Cole. I listen to Django. I want a meal of sound. I want hearty, like, deep, like somebody who, in the way they sing, in the way they play, I see a history. I see underneath it a world, you know? Not just in this, like, it's just, it's so... Like I don't want small and accurate. I want huge and deep, you know?
Yeah. Yeah, it's I think what you're saying about the 1 minute thing with Instagram and then the consolidation of the minute attention span. I think that's already sort of happening in a way with TikTok as a parallel
I don't even know
medium.
what it is. Am I too old?
No, I think it's probably like what legacy Facebook users felt about Instagram when it first came out. Is that it was this kind of more abbreviated version that was similar to Facebook that kind of consolidated the format, especially when it came to video content and things like that, where you excuse me. Where you could, at least initially for videos, I think you had a limitation to 30 seconds or 20 seconds or something like that, and then that was expanded, of course. But TikTok is similar in how it's doing it. But I think a lot of this stuff too, also, you know, the art of perfection on Instagram and sort of the polished aspect of it. You know, I think a lot of it too is that we're not really trained. You know, as musicians, but I think generally around receiving negative feedback, around failure in a public space, you know, to the degree to which, you know, Instagram is public or we perceive failures there to be the same as somebody knocking on your door and telling you to your face that you suck or whatever it is. There's that our sort of socio-emotional immune systems are not cannot tolerate public failures in a way where we're able to learn from them. And I think a lot of the things, as somebody who has failed publicly and had some black eyes there, I think it does teach you a lot about having some emotional resilience to stuff like that and being okay with maybe. You know, like I think that the fact that you do so much live stuff where it's really about playing and not just trying to show a mirror image of yourself in the best possible way that is really refined. That I think that it actually I think it demonstrates the reason why you've had so much success on social media.
Yeah, I mean, I think
because there is a realness to this, just like the same way with Joe Rogan. There's a realness to his podcast, and whether you agree with his philosophies or his opinions, he's okay with looking bad.
Sure,
and I think and making mistakes.
Also, an advantage of not putting makeup on your flaws is that you get to confront them and work on them. You get to do that.
Yeah.
If you keep running into mistakes and not just avoid, those topics where you have less knowledge about, and just, do it daily. For me, it's like, okay, so I can't do this thing at that tempo. So let's just do it until I can do it. Let's work on it. But it's like, I don't care. I mean, I know I can play guitar. I know people know I can play guitar. I didn't. That wasn't always the reality. But it's like, I don't feel like, messing up a passage, or especially if it's like live, reflects on me in any kind of negative way. I mean, it's like, I do have my records, are things where I have a higher bar of what kind of mistakes I'll allow. I'll redo the take if it's like, if it's messed up, and I do mess up in the studio. It's not that, but like, that thing has my stamp of approval. But I just feel like, we're already at an age where everybody knows that everybody can edit. So it's more exciting to see somebody who, is using editing tools in a moderate way, to where the in time vision of things has as much weight as the planned vision of things. It's like we were just in an age of speech writing for a very long time, and we're approaching another age of talking.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, I think our emphasis is always on or at least we're trained to have emphasis more on the final product and less on the process.
Yeah, but jazz is music that the process is the final product.
Yeah, well, I think though that it's as you kind of talked about earlier. There's been in music, there's been sort of a collapse of a lot of different things, and I think that if your interpretation of jazz comes from the lens of Instagram, that may look very different than what a jazz musician that's been making a living at jazz, that's been doing that, because there's this
it's kind of like it's if your impression of how a woman looks comes from the cover of some, like, Vanity Fair magazine, where they photoshopped some ribs out, and your like your whole aesthetic of beauty is fictional. And if your idea of jazz is these perfect voice-led 30-second note lines that happen for, like, 19 seconds, it's like you go to a gig, that's not what you're hearing. Some players play like that at points, but it's like, that's not the point. It's like, I mean, again, that stuff is great, but it's just one thing that happens. The real idea of this kind of music is that time is integrated into it, meaning that 1 minute of played music equals 1 minute of music. Like the way the time is going, and you're along for the ride. Composition, one measure could be set on for 2 months. One bar in Pro Tools could be manipulated for an indefinite amount of time. The time isn't just kind of a continuum. And I think that's the level of commitment that music like jazz presents. That it's live and it's open, and it draws people to a moment, and the moment is sliding, and you're sliding along with it.
Yeah.
And you get to see people making choices, painting on time.
Yeah. 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 Well, I think we kind of covered the gamut. We got kind of good and abstract there at the end, just as
let's wrap up. I'm good.
Just good. Jazzes. But Dani, I supremely appreciate your time and also the advice that you gave. We covered a lot of ground between guitar tones, Stevie Ray Vaughan technique, making a living as a musician, and then getting into maybe a surface level philosophical discussion at the end there. And I really just appreciate your friendship and just sort of being candid with us about this stuff. And if people want to learn more about you or about Marbin, where are the places they can do that?
go to marbinmusic.bandcamp.com and you can buy our stuff there. We have CDs, vinyl, books with transcriptions, shirts, all that stuff. And facebook.com/marbinmusic is where I live. So.
And you do live streams, what would you say, almost daily?
Daily.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I would say you're very interactive there with your audience.
Oh,
so it's very rare that you could see somebody come in there and not if they have a burning question or something like that. And I've seen you do everything from technique driven stuff to as far as people's questions and getting into the details of gypsy jazz. Yeah. So I think it's a really good resource to have that I certainly when I see it come up, if I'm in a place where I can listen to some music, I definitely tune in. So thank you again, Dani, for this, and I'll look forward to speaking to you again offline.
Okay. Bye, Mason.
Bye.